normal working hours. Yet the whole campaign was totally irrational. The Chinese were simply producing steel, but not making anything useful out of it. What is more, the steel produced was of such poor quality that it served absolutely no purpose. The true dimensions of the catastrophe emerged in 1959. While villagers were working on making steel or building canals, the fields were left empty. Falsified figures showed huge production, although there was actually a great production gap. A massive famine started within a few months. The situation was worsened by a severe drought. In 1960, the worst famine in the history of mankind erupted. "40 million people starved to death in just 2 years. Mao's Great Leap Forward had ended in catastrophe. We have seen throughout this film what a ruthless and cruel system communism truly is. Another fact that needs to be made clear is the unintelligent thinking and behavior of communist regimes. The so-called reconstruction project that Mao called his Great Leap Forward is a clear example of this. The Great Leap Forward shows the clichés of communist ideology bear no relation to the real world, and that the great ideas of communist theoreticians such as Marx, Lenin, and Mao, supposedly so scientific and clever, are in fact nothing more than empty nonsense. Communists believed in a mistaken ideology and inflicted terrible suffering on mankind by trying to impose that ideology on society. The irrational system established by communism is also a living manifestation of God's description of the deniers in the Quran as people who do not use their intellect. The senseless policies of the Communist Party were not the only reason for the famine during the Great Leap Forward. Mao and his supporters also regarded famine as a method of punishment. The regions worst affected by the famine were those cities and villagers regarded as not being sufficiently obedient to the communist regime. The party seized all the produce in such areas, and just as in Stalin's Russia, hid it in warehouses while deliberately leaving the villagers to starve. The reason the Chinese communists were able to be so ruthless was the result of the way they regarded man. Just like Lenin and Stalin, Mao regarded human beings as a species of animal and attached no value to them. That was a natural consequence of the Darwinism he had imbibed in his youth. When he said, "The basis of Chinese socialism rests on Darwin and his theory of evolution," Mao was actually clarifying the basis of the savagery he implemented. Mao's Darwinist philosophy has been described by the Harvard University historian James Reeves Pusey in these terms. The thought of Mao Zedong was and remains a powerful mixture of Darwinian ironies and contradictions. Mao Zedong, in an angry moment, as late as 1964, swore that all demons shall be annihilated. He dehumanized his enemies, partly in traditional hyperbole, partly in social Darwinian realism. Like the anarchists, he saw reactionaries as evolutionary throwbacks, who deserved extinction. The people's enemies were non-people, and they did not deserve to be treated as people. The Muslim Uyghur Turks of East Turkestan headed the list of those who suffered Mao's cruelty. With its long-term policy of genocide in East Turkestan, the communist regime ruthlessly slaughtered millions of innocent people. As a result of the nuclear tests deliberately carried out in the region, tens of thousands of children were left handicapped. This policy of genocide, that has been identified by international organizations, is still going on today in all its ruthlessness. Following the disaster of the Great Leap Forward, Mao withdrew from the scene and went into a kind of seclusion. The running of the country was left to more moderate civil servants. The Chinese were able in part to return to normal life and have a sigh of relief. But Mao was planning new murders. He thought that communist ideology had not spread sufficiently in society, and attributed the failure of the Great Leap Forward to that deficiency. Mao's supporters printed tens of millions of copies of his Little Red Book, consisting of some of his speeches. Known as the Great Helmsman, Mao re-emerged onto the scene in the second half of the 1960s. A display of swimming he gave in the Yangtze River demonstrated both his energy and his support. Mao first of all set about debasing classic Chinese arts for the ideological program he dreamed of. He wished to graft the ideas of violence and conflict, the basis of communism, onto society, and thought he could commence the process with opera. The traces of communist insanity could clearly be seen on the faces of the performers, who had been brainwashed by Maoist doctrines. A visit by Mao to the opera was the greatest honor imaginable for such fanatical supporters. Mao commenced his second leap in 1966. This was the great proletarian cultural revolution. Propaganda portraying Mao as a divine figure was put out all over China. School children were made to learn his Little Red Book off by heart. His slogans were written on walls, and posters portrayed him as literally a superhuman being.